The image of death in Jean-Paul Sartre's novel Nausea. Ivan Bratus. Anna Hunka. Abstract. This article examines several important concepts of interpreting death in Jean-Paul Sartre's novel Nausea. In addressing the issue of death, we pay special attention to the impossibility of fully revealing the nature of this phenomenon from the standpoint of ordinary or generalized human experience. Our article focuses on the existential concept of death, which Jean-Paul Sartre partly formed, partly professed, and implemented in his works. Several quotes from the novel Nausea illustrate Sartre's philosophical views on the ability of individuals to rethink individual, collective, and transcendental notions about the nature of the transition from the living to the non-living. The question of a unique ethic of murder and suicide in Nausea is raised. Special attention is given to the concept of suicide, which has a rather unusual authorial interpretation in the representatives of existentialism, of which Jean-Paul Sartre is a prominent figure. It is shown that suicide, in the interpretation of the writer, does not have the usual contours, as it is interpreted from the position of the inability to avoid excess things in the world. An even more revolutionary position regarding murder is considered. It is positioned from the viewpoint of liberation from existence as a benevolent act. The absurdity of Jean-Paul Sartre's assertions is caused by the rethinking of the paradigm of hostages of being who are unable to make the right choice on their own and should be grateful to those who shorten their lifespan. This paradigm has an existential nature, which is rethought through the rethinking of the burden of choice by a person. The relevance of our research is conditioned by the inevitability of the problem of death throughout the history of humanity. It is proven that Jean-Paul Sartre made a significant breakthrough in comprehending the mystery of death. Several aspects of understanding the theme of death are proposed: death in historical past, death in the future, murder, suicide, etc. An overview of some scientific explorations about the life and work of the writer and the theme of death is conducted. It is demonstrated that death is devoid of purely negative connotations, as its nature only reproduces the general disorder. Sartre believes that the disorder itself is based not on the nature of chaos but on the inability of a person to grasp the entire array of events. It is noted that the simplification of death does not contribute to understanding its nature but only makes it more incomprehensible. Keywords: Sartre, death, literature, culture, being. Problem statement. The theme of death is considered one of the key topics in existentialist philosophy. It is no coincidence that in his work, Jean-Paul Sartre repeatedly touched on this painful topic, imbuing it with a special sound in a number of vivid artistic images. In the novel Nausea 1938, death acquires not so much a personalized image, it is seen in various characters and circumstances of the plot, pursues the protagonist, and creates the appropriate structure of artistic reality. It is unlikely that it could act independently because the philosophical component of existentialism constantly drives death into the labyrinths of absurdity. It is this unique breadth of death that fills the novel Nausea with rather controversial assertions, shakes the foundations of human existence, and allows us to still attempt to decode Sartre's code. Undoubtedly, the vivid artistic images of death help the writer solve many problems with the dynamics of the plot and emphasize the intellectual tension of the novel Nausea. Analysis of recent research and publications. Today in Ukraine, we are faced with an extraordinary surge of interest in the theme of death. The war has prompted researchers to comprehend a new reality. Millions of Ukrainian families have somehow faced the premature loss of relatives, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. The black harvest of Russian aggression has created a reality in which none of us is immune to encountering tragic news. Everyone in our country has lost someone known under Bakhmut. Accordingly, this topic is tracked in scientific publications. These aspects are followed in the research by Harkavenko NV and Doskak SS. They advise turning to religious origins in an attempt to overcome the fear of death, the main direction of awareness, and mastering the fear of death in young people in wartime conditions is primarily the regulation of this fear. It can be achieved through comprehension, giving a certain meaning to the situation, forming broad social motives: love for loved ones, faith in God, justice, victory, hatred of the enemy, a sense of duty, etc. Meaningful activity overcomes the fear of death exactly as much as needed to preserve the meaning of life in wartime conditions. In his article, Mykolaivna touches on a rather painful and controversial aspect of death, suicide. This phenomenon greatly interested Jean-Paul Sartre and found significant reflection in his novel Nausea. Mykolaivna carefully analyzes various manifestations of suicide and concludes, consequently, it can be argued that loneliness is often the cause of the suicide thought's arousal along with further execution. The idea of suicide circulates in the public consciousness and is reproduced by various means of culture. The attitude to suicide at both social and individual levels of consciousness is closely linked to the ethical attitude to life and death. Measures to prevent suicide require the coordination and cooperation of a wide range of sectors of society, including law, education, the health sector, intrafamily work, and the media. Such efforts should be comprehensive and complex, aimed at creating a healthy picture of the world, delivering a sense of security, and avoiding destructive negative loneliness. In literary interpretations of death, interesting observations are made by Tatiana Leherko. Grinchenko consciously plays on meanings and even stereotypes, saying that red roses, a symbol of love and life, but it is unknown whether they seek happiness or death in their desperate burning. The thought arises, the thirst for life, the desire to know and absorb all its joys and benefits as quickly as possible, is it not actually the true path to death and quick extinction? Researcher Mariana Petrovna Lukyanenko thoroughly analyzed the complexity of translating the novel Nausea into Ukrainian. She found that a significant part of the linguistic material is closely connected with the identity and difference of the author's and the protagonist's views. She notes that the novel Nausea illustrates a distinct metaphorical structure. The system of linguistic images is striking in its complexity, as it reproduces the boundless stream of existential consciousness of the main character Antoine Roquentin and simultaneously reflects the worldview of Jean-Paul Sartre himself. The author's existential perception of the world creates the unusualness of metaphorization and the contrast in verbal depiction. This non-standard stylistic approach enhances the conceptuality of the text space of the novel. In turn, researcher Irina Anatolievna was able to qualitatively analyze the writer's work through linguistic analysis. In her exploration, she concluded that, the linguistic analysis of the novel Nausea by J.P. Sartre allows us to conclude that the text is the highest unit of the language system. In the novel Nausea, J.P. Sartre reveals the concept of text as a subjective model of the objective world. Thus, the writer in his work acts as a linguist, which fully justifies considering the term text as a language phenomenon or a separate system. Thanks to the mastery of J.P. Sartre, the author, the reader feels the influence of existential suggestion. Entering the stream of consciousness of the main character creates a situation of peculiar coexistence of the practice of intuitive cognition necessary for understanding Sartre's ideas. We have also explored some peculiarities of the novel Nausea. In particular, we pointed out the weak position of the main character in the context of the search for the essence of being. In Sartre's work, the main character is also caught in the whirlwind of existential search, having nothing to cling to in the emptiness of being. While waiting for attacks of nausea encounters with true reality, Antoine Roquentin constantly attempts to cling to historical and life studies to find the essence of being. He is even willing to accept personal madness, it would be a simple answer to the disorder of the world, as if everything is more or less fine with the world, and the problem is personally with Antoine Roquentin, which would be the lesser evil for him. We have also explored the nature of the disorientation of personality in the novel Nausea, J.P. Sartre in the novel Nausea 1938 demonstrates the inability of human consciousness to perceive the essence of the surrounding world without destroying the personality, at least temporarily. Thus, the encounter with true reality for Antoine Roquentin, the main character, is associated with attacks of dizziness and unbearable disorientation. For him, there are two realities, daily, imaginary, acceptable for human consciousness, and true, disturbing, hostile. This division complicates the existence of a person and throws him/her off balance. The protagonist of the novel demonstrates a significant weakening of personality when encountering a true reality. He can no longer pretend and see the world as he imagined it. Presentation of the main material. The problem of death is vividly reflected in the novel Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. This novel outlines several paradigms of perceiving death. Therefore, let us outline the most characteristic of them. 1. Death as a phenomenon of humanization and return to nature. The philosophical coordinates of the novel emphasize the impossibility of perceiving death as a completely incomprehensible phenomenon. The existential concept allows for a simple rethinking of death from the perspective of the return to nature theory. This position is quite contradictory. Death is seen as a transition to the initial state, which is expressed in the creation of the image of an amorphous body. This image plays an important role in the novel because it is one of the few landmarks for the protagonist. Antoine Roquentin seeks to understand his place in the world through the prism of his return to nature. I am slipping through the very heart of the puddle, the mud is draining down from me. I am becoming a soft, amorphous mass. This is what I have always been afraid of becoming. What if my skin bursts? A stream of mud will flow out of me, I will become a shapeless pile, an obscene puddle. At the same time, the writer presents an important transformation of the concept of death, from the real to the natural position. Sartre presents death as a natural phenomenon, but in his interpretation, it becomes more natural for humans, creating the image of death as a phenomenon of the natural world. This position is revolutionary because it allows one to find a place for death in the human space, simplifying its nature and relieving fear. The phenomenon of death is combined with the concept of death of the body, the transition of an ordinary person to the category of the absent. Such a person no longer exists in the physical sense, but their essence, nature, and meaning remain. Sartre notes that for Antoine Roquentin, death becomes something new in the context of human existence, and therefore its understanding is an important step in comprehending the world. I do not like people dying, it breaks the story. I have to reinvent the deceased, create a new story for them, different from the one I had before. 2. The concept of suicide in Sartre's novel. The concept of suicide is one of the central themes in Jean-Paul Sartre's works. In the novel Nausea, this theme is given special attention. Sartre presents suicide as a complex phenomenon that involves a deep understanding of the nature of existence. The main character, Antoine Roquentin, often reflects on suicide, considering it as an option for escaping the absurdity of existence. However, Sartre presents suicide not as an act of despair, but as a form of liberation from the unbearable weight of existence. But there is one thing that reassures me, I no longer even want to commit suicide. One should be more enthusiastic, believe in an afterlife to want to die. Sartre's interpretation of suicide is unique and provocative. He sees it not as an escape from life, but as a way to confront the absurdity of existence and make a final, absolute choice. This choice is an expression of ultimate freedom, where the individual asserts their control over their existence by choosing to end it. 3. Murder as an act of liberation. In the novel Nausea, Sartre explores the concept of murder from an existential perspective. He presents murder as an act that can be seen as a form of liberation from existence. This idea is revolutionary and controversial, as it challenges traditional ethical views on murder. Sartre suggests that murder can be interpreted as a benevolent act when it is seen as a means of liberating someone from the burdens of existence. To kill a man is to deprive him of his future, to reduce him to nothing. But to kill a man is also to liberate him from his existence. This position reflects Sartre's existentialist philosophy, where the focus is on individual freedom and the subjective experience of existence. Murder, in this context, is not just a physical act, but a profound existential decision that impacts the very nature of being. 4. Death as an existential liberation. In Nausea, death is portrayed as an existential liberation. Sartre suggests that death is not just the end of physical existence but a transition to a state of non-existence that frees the individual from the absurdity and burdens of life. This concept is central to existentialist thought, where death is seen as a release from the constraints of existence and a return to a state of nothingness. I do not want to die, I am afraid. But I cannot live either. I am caught in a trap, and death is the only way out. Sartre's view of death as an existential liberation highlights the tension between the desire for life and the inevitability of death. It underscores the existential struggle to find meaning in a world that is inherently meaningless and the ultimate freedom that death represents. Conclusions. The theme of death in Jean-Paul Sartre's novel Nausea is multifaceted and complex. Sartre explores various aspects of death, including its naturalness, its role as a form of liberation, and its existential significance. Through the character of Antoine Roquentin, Sartre delves into the profound implications of death for human existence and the ways in which individuals confront the reality of their mortality. Sartre's existentialist perspective offers a unique and thought-provoking interpretation of death, challenging traditional views and highlighting the deep philosophical questions surrounding the nature of existence and non-existence. References. 1. Bratus, IV. 2019. The Concept of Personality Destruction in the Existential Novel Nausea by J.P. Sartre. Philology and Literature Studies, 1, 111-121. 2. Bratus, IV. 2020. The Search for the Essence of Being in Jean-Paul Sartre's Novel Nausea. Literature and Culture, 3, 152-159. 3. Harkavenko, N.V., and Doskak, S.S. 2022. The Regulation of Fear of Death in Wartime Conditions. Psychology Today, 6-1, 48-51. 4. Leherko, T. 2021. The Symbolism of Roses in Lyzhaya Ukrainka's Poetry. Ukrainian Literary Studies, 4, 80-85. 5. Lukyanenko, M.P. 2018. Translation Challenges of Jean-Paul Sartre's Novel Nausea. Linguistics and Translation, 5, 42-48. 6. Maliman, V.I. 2020. Social and Psychological Aspects of Suicide in Contemporary Society. Sociology and Psychology, 9-3, 289-297. 7. Riva, I.A. 2020. Linguistic Analysis of Jean-Paul Sartre's Novel Nausea. Philology and Language Studies, 8, 71-76. 8. Sartre, J.P. 1938. Nausea. Paris, Gallimard.